to know who's in the room today. So let's see, who have we got to our, let's say, policymakers, people in the policy field? Okay, a couple of policymakers. And local governments. Okay. Okay. NGOs. Okay. Business, anyone from enterprise, business, SMEs? Okay. Anyone else, just a normal citizen, not particularly with any particular function? Journalists? Yeah. I'm a journalist, so we've got at least two. Okay, and we've said if you could come and try and sort of sit further down, that would be good so we can get everyone nice and close. Okay, as our last few people are coming in, I think I'm going to start the session because I'd like to finish on time. So let's try and start on more or less on time as well. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to EU Green Cities Summit Conference in Brussels, and this particular session, 3.2, which is discussing greening cities in our partner countries. And a warm welcome to all of those watching on the web, online at the live web streaming too. My name is Aminda Lee. I'm a British journalist, ex-BBC, now living and working out of Rome. And I'm specializing in environmental topics. And this is my 11th Green Week moderating here, so I'm very honored to be your moderator and be asked back again this year. This session has been organized by DG Environment in cooperation with the European Commission's Directorate General for International Cooperation and Development, DG DevCo for short. And I'm going to be telling you in a moment how the next 90 minutes are going to work. Before then, of course, we always have some practical details to go through. So in this room we have interpretation that's in French on channel 2 and in English, though I will tell you that all our speakers will be speaking in English. When we come to questions, there will be an opportunity if you want to also ask your question in German. Please, if you need headsets, they are in the cloakroom in the beginning bit where you saw when you came in. Please do keep your mobiles on silent, but we don't want you to switch them off because we'd love you to tweet if you want to pass on what you've heard here. And the hashtag is EU Green Week. And of course that also applies to those of you watching online too. Please feel free to tweet about what you hear in this session. We're not going to be using the ConnectMe app questions in this session, but you can still of course, use it for networking. So, as you know, this year's Green Week is about sharing ideas and experiences on how to develop cities in a sustainable way. And this is quite a task, as you've probably already realized and heard. Because, of course, cities, they have many challenges, from air quality to noise, waste and water management, and, of course, urban planning, just to name one or two. Europe is starting to already tackle these issues, but if we are really serious about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, greening cities in the EU alone will not be enough. We've got to promote a similar process in our partner countries too. And in fact, this poses an even greater challenge, as many of these cities are in a much worse position than those in Europe. They're already suffering the negative consequences of climate change. They're vulnerable to disasters, have much higher pollution levels, and they have critical problems with infrastructure, governance, and many other things. This morning, we're going to hear of the various perspectives that will show how the EU and partner cities are working together towards a greener future for all of our cities and our planet. First of all, we're going to be hearing about what the European Union is doing from Lars Gronvald at DG DevCo. Then, of course, none of this can be done without money. And that's where Nigel Jolens from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development comes in. He's going to be giving us an idea of how much the EBRD has already invested, and he's also going to tell us what's been achieved, and also what further funding is available to help cities in partner countries. Then we're going to move to the ground, to these local authorities. We have some representatives here. We're going to be hearing about what they're doing. with Wolfgang Teubner from Eclair, short for International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. I hope I've pronounced it correctly. It's got a strange pronunciation. And then we're going to be hearing from our final speaker, who's Vivian Aheri-Ibor, who is going to be virtually transporting us more than 7,000 kilometers to Ghana to tell us about her experience running City Waste Recycling Limited, a success story that is making the country's capital Accra greener and cleaner too. Then we're going to have some discussions between the panelists, and then there's going to be a chance for your questions. So please save them up. We're very interested to hear your questions. This is what it's all about, sharing information, hearing more about the expert speakers we have. So, to start off our subject, I would like to call on stage Lars Gronveld, who's team leader for urban development cities at DG DevCo. In his 10-minute presentation, he's going to explain why Europe must help cities in partner countries, what is already happening, and how cities hold the key to efficient solutions and are becoming important players in their own rights in areas like the fight against climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lars Gronveld.
Yes, welcome, and thank you very much for coming here. I think it's a great opportunity to have a discussion of how the EU and DevCo and are engaging with cities across the globe to try to, what should we say, find solution to our common challenges as embodied in the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll give a few pointers of what is driving our engagement with the cities, how we are trying to change our approach, and what we have done, and which are the main, what can we call it, instrument we will take forward for that engagement. How do we change? Oh, sorry. Excellent. This one. First, a little bit. This week is mostly dedicated to the green cities within the EU. So we were very happy to have this, what can we call it, session focusing more on the external angle. And as was already mentioned by Amanda, a lot of the challenges actually lies outside the EU. We will see an increase over the coming decades of urbanization of urban inhabitants of maybe 2 billion people. 90% of that will happen in Africa and Asia. A lot of the, what should we say, pollution, a lot of the waste generation, a lot of the waste management, all the infrastructure gaps are happening outside. We will see a tremendous increase in carbon dioxide, and we have to find solution to how to actually address these challenges. I read recently that today we have 1.5 billion air condition equipment, and in 3 decades longer we will probably have 5 or 6 billion, and that means that the mere challenges of actually addressing this here abroad, I think, is a core driving factor. The second proposition we have in this year is also from DevCo. We see cities as increasingly being an actor that take some of these agendas forward. We saw when US was withdrawing from the Paris Declaration, Paris Agreement, many of the cities in US said we would actually take this forward. We'll still act on and comply with these requirements. Similarly, we see a strong voice from many city associations for taking action at city level. And also when we see the cities in the developing world, they are often facing the population that are suffering from congestion, from lack of waste management, lack of municipal services. So we see very much that the cities are a core actor for coming back forward with these results and new solutions. We have, as an aid donor, traditionally engaged at the country, national to national government, as well as with civil society. But now we are very much focused on trying to see how can we actually develop a direct engagement to work and support cities in their functions. The last thing when we talk about urbanization, which is also guiding this, we're often seeing urbanization as resulting in a multitude of environmental, social challenges. But we also see this very much as urbanization as essential part of transformation of economies, and fundamentally, what should we say, a positive force for finding solution to many of these challenges. By bringing people closer together, many of the municipal services can better be provided. One can find transport solution, public transport that otherwise would not be possible. So urbanization we also very much see as a positive force for actually finding solution to our common problems. I think we also see this role of cities reflected in the new Sustainable Development Goals. Apart from there is one goal dedicated to cities, we also see all the other goals actually can only be achieved by the active role of local authorities and cities. It was also reflected in what is called the New Urban Agenda, which also within UN with UN Habitat was adopted how to take this forward in Quito in 2016. And if you look at our own policy level from Europe, there we last year adopted what is called the European Consensus, that means EU and the member states, and also having a dedicated chapter on how to support cities. Let me turn to a few examples of how we actually engage with cities and what we are trying to support. Does this now work?
Just click there. Go the other way.
Yeah, excellent. First, as we have discussed, one of the core elements that we see, this is access to finance. The urban development require tremendous amount of infrastructure investments. This is far beyond what can be provided through what we call traditional development cooperation. So we are increasingly turning to how can we use our development aid to leverage financing. I think this will also further be discussed from other panelists. But from an aid side, we are often trying to blend our aid money with finance to in some way make it affordable for cities to take these investments forward, to support the development of good projects. This we call blending. One of the projects we have is in Laos, where we, with the support of technical assistance and design, are seeking to advance a mass rapid transport system to try to reduce or balance the use of private cars and finding sustainable transport mobility. A second area where we are very active in supporting is what we call supporting or funding pilot projects and concrete solutions. We have a multiple of dedicated facilities trying to address various urban issues. This goes from such things as sustainable consumption and production, which we have a switch program, it's called. We are supporting Global Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, which try to find climate-friendly technologies. We are supporting sustainable mobility through Mobilize Your City. We are supporting climate-resilient cities through the UN system. But a number of things that I try to pilot new solutions and develop, what's it say, concrete technical solutions. Here again, an example we have in Ethiopia, where we are working on finding how local communities can adapt to climate change and find efficient solutions. The last thing we also are increasingly working with is with what we call within our national programs, where we actually, with our national interlocutors, agree to have urban development or urban challenges as a core area of intervention. And this is where we can have much more systemic interventions. We have in several countries, we have in Haiti, we have in Cameroon, we have in Uganda, where we in some way come up with a large program, try to involve all the stakeholders, both the national government, the local government and city association, to come up with both urban planning, national urban planning, and also concrete elements to strengthen the creation of urban environments. If you look a bit what we take forward and what are the instruments we will take forward, then we have I think in November last year, launched what we call the European External Investment Plan, which is one of our core elements. This is an attempt to scale up what we call blending, where we in some way will provide guarantees to de-risk investments in a number of areas. But there are five areas, but one of them will focus on sustainable cities. And with that instrument, we are hoping to attract additional capital, both from private sector, but also from other new sources. It could be pension fund, it could be bond issues, but in some way using a guarantee to lower the risk of investments. And there we are partnering up with the various development finance institutions to take such projects forward. We are at the moment receiving a number of programs or proposals from the development banks for how this can be translated. If you look at the overall program that are both target cities, but also climate change, energy, agriculture, But there we will, with 4.4 billion euro, we hope to mobilize 44 billion euro for investments in sustainable development in our partner countries. On the policy side, and also with other instruments, we have just here the 18th of May issued what we call a staff working document on how we will take our work with the cities forward, which would guide our work. I think this is to demonstrate that we seek to integrate both governance, the social and environmental and economic aspect of sustainable development. The core message in this staff working document is that we have to move away from a thematically focused access on cities and working much more on an integrated version that means directly with cities integrating all these aspects. And a core instrument in this context is that we will work with local authorities or city authorities to strengthen their capacity for doing urban planning, create investments and take solutions forward. What we will base this on, this is very much to try to link such local authorities or city authorities in our partner countries with European city experience and see how we can draw on our experience from Europe for sustainable applications in our partner cities. What we hope today is to get a discussion on these challenges. How do we actually work with local authorities? How do we bring the European experience forward? How can we overcome financing constraints? How can we advance that cities are equipped and able to take sustainable solutions forward? And I welcome that discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Please come and join me on stage, and I'd like to actually ask the rest of the panelists to also come up on stage, please. So we've now had a sort of scene setting, and Lars, you mentioned, access to finance for sustainable cities and the European External Investment Plan, and that's of course one source that partner countries can use to fund their green city projects. Another one is the Green Cities Framework, which is run by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And what I'd like to do now is to call on our next speaker, Nigel Jolans, who's Associate Director, Lead Policy Products, Energy Efficiency and Climate Change at the EBRD. And he's going to give us a short introductory presentation, which is, among other things, going to tell us about the achievements of a pilot project achieving green city action plans in the Armenian capital of Yerevan, the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi, and in the Albanian capital, Tirana. Please welcome Nigel Jolans.
Thank you, Mindy. You said short. I had about an hour prepared. Is that going to be right? No. Okay.
Sorry.
No. In fact, we've been given 3 minutes. And so what I want to do is completely get rid of my presentation and focus on, well, I've got 5 main points that I want to make in the 3 minutes. Is there anyone here a banker? Anyone here from banks, financial institution, other than my colleague Daniele? That's good, because I can only usually cope with giving them 2 main points, and then they can't cope with anything more. So hopefully you can cope with 5 points. The first one is that finance in cities is really important, and it's really important now for us to address in terms of achieving our sustainable development goals and the Paris Agreement. The EBRD, we've done 7 billion euros or thereabouts since we started work in the countries of operation, which is basically Central Eastern Europe through to Central Asia, the Western Balkans, and North Africa. That's our country focus. So 7 billion euros, 400 municipal investment projects covering everything from district energy through to solid waste management, street lighting, energy efficiency, public buildings, and so on. So the first point, finance is really important, but it's not just any kind of finance. The second point is that there are significant barriers for municipal investments in cities. They're having to address externality costs, first mover costs with respect to technologies, unfamiliarity with the technologies and investments that they need to make. And the only way we can do that is if we partner, is if the financiers partner with donors who can bring the cost of borrowing down. So that's the second point, the important role of donors. The third point And this might sound a little strange coming from someone who works for a bank, but at the EBRD we acknowledge that finance is a necessary but not sufficient condition for achieving the sustainability goals. And that's why in our Green Cities framework, we have three main components. The first is finance, and the framework is a 250 million euro framework across our countries. But that is partnered and linked very closely to a policy element where we develop green city action plans and interaction with national and local governments on policy changes to change the framework within which cities are operating. And the third element is pure technical assistance or technical cooperation with the cities, building capacity, everything from how to prepare loan documentation through to how to do urban and sustainability planning. Okay, so that's the first 3 points. Bankers now are completely lost because they're full up. So finance is important, affordability and the importance of donors, and that finance is necessary but not sufficient. The last 2 points. We've discovered, I mean, the way that we work as a bank is pragmatic, and we've discovered that you need to be really simple about the way that we go about this and to keep the program as simple as possible. So, for example, we've seen other institutions engage with cities to develop sustainable action plans that take 2 years to develop, fantastic, hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders, but at the end of the day, they lead to nothing. Whereas at the EBRD, and these other institutions, many of them spend millions of euros developing these sustainability plans. At the EBRD, we try to keep the sustainability planning really pragmatic. We spend about 300,000 euros, and we've worked with Eclair to develop this very pragmatic planning instrument that it takes 9 months to go through this process. So pragmatism and keeping it simple is very important. And the final point is the need to engage with stakeholders for buy-in. If anyone would ask me now what I've learned from the process of developing the Green Cities framework within the bank, so I lead this with another colleague, I would say we needed to give more attention to stakeholder engagement. At the beginning, we were just bankers and we'd go in and say, yeah, finance is everything. And we kind of left our cities behind a little bit. So that's the main lesson that I've learned. So 5 main points. Finance is important. Importance of donors to help address affordability. Finance is not sufficient. It needs to be linked in very closely with policy technical assistance. The approach needs to be pragmatic, and the importance of stakeholders. How many minutes was that?
Enough.
Okay, thank you.
No, but it was good. Thank you very much indeed. I did say that you would mention some of the things that had come out, so I'm going to ask you a question since I know you didn't have time to. So can you tell us maybe some interesting things that came out of either Tbilisi or Yerevan? Or?
Okay, sure. So as I mentioned, one of the core elements of our Green Cities framework, and I guess to many of you this will be seen as not rocket science, but in a financial institution, the idea of engaging in urban planning is completely innovative, all right? So what we're doing is, within a bank, we're linking the urban planning, what we call a Green City Action Plan, but call it a NEAP or a CAP or whatever. You all have different names for it, but they're the same thing, roughly. We link that to finance. We worked with Eclair and the OECD to develop the methodology, and then we applied it in several countries. The very first city where we applied it was in Yerevan in Armenia. And we had Eclairs backstopping us on this as we applied it. In Yerevan, it was a 9-month process to develop the plan, and one of the core elements of that plan was an investment schedule for the city to address priority environmental challenges. So this is not just climate change, it's trying to cover the full range of environmental issues. And as you can imagine, anyone here from Armenia? I know we've got someone from Tbilisi here. Tbilisi was, yes, was the second city that we did the GCAP. In fact, Tbilisi started after Yerevan, but finished before Yerevan. And in Tbilisi, if I jump now to Tbilisi, so we were talking about the need for investment plans. In Tbilisi, in the GCAP, 9-month process, approved by the city at the end of that process by the mayor. It led to an investment schedule of 400 million euros, identifying specific investments, who would finance them, and the role of IFIs like the EBRD and other institutions.
For example, and
okay,
what did they invest
in? So real investments. Okay, so in Tbilisi, because we're pragmatic, this is something we do different than other international financial institutions. We have this thing called a trigger investment. So we don't just go into a city and say, let's do a plan and then let's see what happens at the end of it. We work with a city who is already doing an investment with us. And the trigger project in Tbilisi's case was the Tbilisi bus project, 100-something CNG buses. That was a very, very interesting project because for us, from the time of signing the deal to the buses on the ground was something in the order of 7 months. It was astounding. So these, I don't know if you're familiar with the colleagues from Tbilisi, but so that was one project. Now we're following up with 2 investment projects. One is a Tbilisi solid waste project, which is mentioned specifically in the GCAP, and the second one is energy efficiency in public buildings, which we are working with Tbilisi. And for each city, so Yerevan, we're doing the same. We have a Yerevan metro project that comes out of the GCAP. So the specific investments that follow on are the things that we use to measure the success of our planning instrument.
Okay, thank you. Well, so we've now got the policies, we've now got the money, we've now got the sort of, let's say, where we want to go forward, and what we need to do is we need local actors on the ground to help that happen, which is where we're going to hear from Wolfgang Teubner, who is Regional Director Europe and Managing Director of Eclair. I've got it pronounced it correctly, thank you, sort of, maybe, which is, and he's the Managing Director of the Eclair European Secretariat. This is an association which is the only network of sustainable cities operating worldwide. And hands up who doesn't know what Eclair is. Okay, well, there's a few people in the room, and I'm sure there's some people on web streaming who maybe don't know what it is either. So just to give you an idea of the scale of its operations, this is what I found from your website, so hopefully it's all correct. 12 megacities, 100 super cities and urban regions. It represents 450 large cities, 450 small and medium-sized cities and towns in 86 countries. So I would say that you have quite a lot of experience of local authority on the ground, and hopefully you can tell us a little bit about how that city-to-city cooperation works, not just within the EU, but also outside in our partner countries, which of course is the focus, and also give us an idea of some of how these challenges can be overcome, because it's good to hear about challenges, but it's also nice to hear about solutions. So please welcome Wolfgang Teubner.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, maybe just a quick thing. Because we noticed that our acronym is maybe difficult to spell out, so we changed our name, and this Eclair Local Governments for Sustainability is now basically our name. We don't use the old name anymore, also because it was sort of limiting us too much to the environmental topic, and we think we work more on integrated urban development. I mean, just to give a bit of an indication, I mean, how are we managing to basically serve all these cities and maybe a number more? We are having currently 18 offices around the world in all the different regions. I mean, we are quite spread out in Asia due to the kind of, cultural and political differences that are there in that region. But also we have an office in South America, Central America, Caribbean, and of course in Africa. To indicate a bit how we work, I just chose one of the projects, which is currently in its second stage. It's called Urban LED, so it's low emission development strategy. So as I think Nigel very well indicated, I mean, we are, in that sense, if we would say he's working on the hard stuff, as a bank, we are working on the soft stuff, which means governance and management structures and policy issues in local governments. So, and this project is, for example, a clear cooperation project. So where we have a number of cities in this was in fast-growing countries in the first stage. Now we are more reaching out to more least developed countries, which are still close to the regions that we have been working before. So, for example, now we are moving into Bangladesh and other countries in Asia, and and also Colombia in Latin America, sort of adjacent to Brazil, so to basically transfer the knowledge that has been already developed in phase one and use the cities that have been sort of the core cities in phase one also to transfer the knowledge sort of on a south-south basis within their own region. So I mean, I think here it clearly explains why we choose the low emission development strategy thing, because I mean, I think it covers also a large part. I mean, I think as Nigel already said, I mean, whatever you call it, I think if you look into urban development and strategy and planning development, I mean, you will ultimately, start to cover most of the relevant topics in any city, regardless what your starting point is. And in this case, of course, it was triggered by linking it up to sort of the energy and climate agenda, and that's why we work in this particular project on low emission development strategies. We have been working on sanitation, water and sanitation issues before in a kind of a bit of a smaller setting, but also between Africa, Asia and Europe, and also on environmental management systems for countries in Asia particularly. So here you see that there is a range of project cities which have all their sort of partners in Europe, and how they're basically linking up with them. And here you see a bit sort of the priority issues that sort of have been developed by the target cities. I mean, I think what we try to do is, in principle, to strengthen the governance, capacity in cities, because I mean, I think that's also what we usually see, and what we sometimes also criticize within principle the financing institution. And I think which was also in that sense reflected by Nigel in a certain way, is that there's a lot of kind of these one-off investment projects, which then often also in terms of their impact fail, because they're not embedded in a kind of a reliable long-term strategy, where basically other projects and infrastructure investments are then connected and follow on, and then also basically in their combination and connection are really ultimately achieving the envisaged goals, and not sort of are in that sense insulated projects that are coming up. Of course, we know that in countries and regions we are struggling. With the structures that we in principle find. And I mean, we talk a lot about cities globally, but of course, I mean, we come from a region and in the world that has a very strong idea about local self-government and has a very well-developed system of local self-government. But of course, I mean, we don't find this in many of the regions that we're actually now targeting, and I think that's one of our core tasks, to basically build the capacity to to strengthen the local self-governments, also being able to manage to digest the investments that are basically possible and would be, you know, coming from you know, with the support of the external investment strategy, but also, you know, with the institutions like the EBRD, so that they can be put to best use.
Sorry, thank you. Talking about this capacity building and the transfer of knowledge, I mean, it seems to me, I mean, we haven't really said it very much, but we all know that every city is different and has its own different challenges, different governance systems. How can we transfer knowledge and expect, because of that, those differences? I mean, do you find this as a problem?
Well, I mean, I think it's often a matter of time. I mean, you know, this is why I think you know, we could not, you know, if I would sit in Europe, I could not really work such a project or such a program. I mean, I need my colleagues in the regions that, you know, that have a deep understanding of what's really you know, on the ground, that have, you know, all the cultural knowledge that it needs to appropriately interact with the institutions in these countries. And of course, we also need to train and make our cities in Europe that are basically partnering with these cities, you know, aware and being able to really, you know, understand the context and help. On the other hand, of course, you have to challenge the people on the ground, and we try, of course, also as far as possible to work on, let's say, a multi-governance level. And I mean, for us currently, and this is also why, for example, we definitely focus on the low emission development strategy here as a topic, is that with you know, before, I mean, you know, the Kyoto Protocol, but much stronger now with the Paris Agreement and the NDCs and so on, you know, the whole system, you know, of these multi-level governance dialogues that are ongoing, that you can basically, you know, get more engagement and more support for, you know, developing local self-government to develop stronger governance structures on the local level in many countries around the world, and this is, I think, what is still necessary.
I think we'll talk about time a little bit later in the panel discussion, because I think time is actually a very important factor. But I want to now, we've done almost all the levels, but we're now at the most important, which is actually implementing things on the ground. And this is where our final speaker of this particular section is going to come in. Could we pass the clicker down here? And you can, would you prefer to stand up, or are you? Okay. Perfect. So we're now going to hear what is happening on the ground in Accra in Ghana in the form of the City Waste Recycling project, or it's actually a company, of which Vivian Aharibo is Managing Director. And this company was a SAG Seed Award winner as an eco-inclusive enterprise in 2016, and it is also the beneficiary of European Switch Africa Green project running in Ghana. And Vivian is currently the lead for CWR in that project's phase 2 on e-waste management. So please tell us more about your work on the ground in Accra. Vivian, give her a good warm welcome.
I'm Vivian from City Waste Recycling. We are a multi-purpose green enterprise, turning waste into resource by adding value to the fractions that we come across. But most importantly, we've done some projects over the past. We've been able to degas over 100,000 fridges. We have a step 1 fridge degassing plant, which has the ability to decontaminate the CFCs from the oil as well. As we are all aware, the foam also contains the R11, which is also an ozone-depleting substance. That is the CFC. We've been able also in the past to recycle a total amount of ferrous metals, over 2,000 tons. We've done 180 tons of aluminium. We've done 10,000 refrigerators that we collected, and 20 tons of CFC gas. So over 200 million of CO2 emission has been conserved. We have voluntarily last year also traded for carbon credit on the carbon market. But most importantly, we've been part of the Switch African Green Project called Phase 1. And as part of that project, we've been able to formalize the informal sector to the formal sector. Why am I saying this? We've trained over 1,000 people from the informal sector as to the do's and don'ts about handling of the e-waste fractions. In the past, we had challenges because Ghana was noted as one of the most polluted sites, for example, Agbogboshi, which we want to reverse. And so in doing this, the project actually helped us train 1,000 people from the informal sector, formalize them. So we have like trainers now who are training, trainers. They are going around the countryside and training people. Because what is dangerous about most of the developing world is that most of the e-waste is done at our backgrounds, which is dangerous. And so now they are going to community levels and engaging these people, talking to them. And then we also undertook the industrial symbiosis. Because when you're dismantling most of these fractions, we did not know what to do with most of the fractions, for example, the plastic, alu, etc. But with the industrial symbiosis, we were able to link the informal sector with industry. So value addition actually came into play because then the negative fractions that they thought was negative, value has been added to it. And in segregating and sourcing these fractions as source, we're also able to prevent decontamination. What also happened during the project in Ghana, we also did a lot of biogas projects by adding community waste using the fecal matter in a mixture form. And one of the projects is currently generating electricity for one of the universities in Ghana. One is also able to use some of the, as part of the industrial symbiosis, like I said, using some of the e-waste fractions like the power intake of the system unit to produce a clean cook stove that whilst you're cooking, you're able to also generate electricity. So in short, we want to say that the Switch African Green Project is a laudable one, it's sustainable, it's changed a lot of lives. Martha actually is a woman from our community, and Martha was actually living on the street, which is a true story. Martha now has an income because as part of the project, if you bring any fraction of waste, it doesn't have to be plastic, organic, or e-waste, a ton, you are put on a health insurance scheme for a year. You have your pension also guaranteed. You are paid for the actual prices for. And then the negative fractions, the hazardous ones, is taken for proper disposal. So we've been able actually to do a lot of mitigation and adaptation processes in our network and been able to create a lot of jobs for these communities because now they have decent incomes because we are using the triple bottom line approach economically, socially, and environmentally. So we want to say that even if the projects will not come to Ghana, but I think there are good projects that could be replicated elsewhere, and we want it to be encouraged so that at the end of the day, we'll be able to create a lot of jobs for our people, be able to mitigate, because climate change is an issue for us. And like we are coming from the other part of the world, we are really suffering now because our farming patterns have changed because of the rains. We have extreme weathers like most of you also have. But how are we going to tackle this? We are saying that there are success stories like ours. We are working with limited budgets, but we are creating jobs and mitigating at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Vivian, what you were saying about how many women do you have working with you? It's mainly women you have.
I'm a bit biased when it comes to this because from where I come from, mainly women are the ones who go to the farm, but we are employing over 70% in our company of women. We have currently 62 permanent staff, and we are employing over 500 people from the informal sector because those are the collectors. So we are closing the loop. We are talking about the green circular economy because the picker, the dismantler, the collector, and the final recycler, we are closing the loop, and that is what we want to be encouraged.
And what you were talking about, the informal sector, this is quite interesting because both Nigel said they need to get more stakeholder involvement, and I don't know if you're also talking about that level of the informal sector. And I would also like to ask you about this as well, Wolfgang, because I think this informal sector is something that is perhaps overlooked a little bit, and how important it is. And we've heard from Vivian that how important it is on the ground. I don't know who would like to go first. You're scribbling away, Nigel.
Well, so my comment about stakeholder engagement was both about formal sector, so that includes business and the other participants within city and local governments. But there's also a need to engage with citizens as a whole, whether they're part of the formal or informal sector, so that they have a sense of ownership. And that ownership is important because at the end of the process, when the planning instruments have been developed and need to be approved, they're only going to be done so by political decision makers if they sense that their communities are supportive, right? If they think that the communities are not going to be supportive, then they're not going to approve it. And we had this issue in Yerevan during our development of the GCAP there, where we had public consultation meetings that the mayor attended, and he could see that there was some resistance towards some things, and concern that air quality in particular was not being addressed enough. And as a result, air quality was much more prominent in the final production.
Yes, just a quick one. Just keep talking. I agree with you perfectly, because back home in Ghana, what we've done also is to set up collection points at community level, where community leaders are the ones running this collection points. So then they have the sense of belonging. So they protect whatever that they can get from the project that they are running. Because without them, because most of the developing world, and even from Ghana, do not have even the common legislations to guide us. Okay, there's no enforcement. So when the system is that weak and you don't have the community's interest, then it will not work out. So perfectly, I think I agree with you.
Well, I think, well, I see it also in a positive way. I mean, the point is, I mean, I find it quite interesting to sometimes see when we look at these developments coming, you know, also when you look what is happening in slums that are really sort of, you know, are starting basically to organize their own systems to, I would say, self-upgrade. And if you often, you know, come in with a very formalized, trying to formalize from the informal, I think you often destroy a lot of structures. And when you look what we currently in Europe discuss very much in the way of decentralization, decentralizing local economies, you know, self-organized social innovation. I mean, you know, if you look at the informal sector in some of the developing countries, you see, you know, some similarities in, of course, in the dynamics and you know, in the structures that are evolving. Because I mean, also, I mean, we have to think that even, you know, in very informal settlements and everything, I mean, you know, there is mobile phones, there is a lot of things coming up, and we see, you know, this kind of I would say quite big gap that we are perceiving, you know, on the one hand side, you know, being open and being able to use these technologies, still having a very low standard of living, but these people are having a lot of potential to organize themselves. And I think it's rather, you know, working with the dynamics that is evolving and using it, and not trying to kind of override it by, you know, solutions that you bring from the outside that you think you need to heavily formalize. I mean, it's a very delicate process. We know that, because also, I mean, you know, I know from some informal projects there have been, you know, health and safety issues that have to be addressed. But you have to move very carefully in order to work with the potential that is evolving and not destroying it by over-formalizing it. And I think that's the art that we have to come in, because we come from very formalized processes. Always when we look at Europe, I mean, we regulate everything. We come from, you know, and we have this aspiration, you know, but I think we have to be very careful and sensitive on that.
Yeah, you mentioned that we could transfer technology and do other things, but I think we can adapt or we can replicate, but not copy. So we have to actually look at it in a local context, because it differs from country to country, and even in Ghana, by region or by culture. So as part of the Street African Green, what we did was that when we did the baseline assessment, we realized that there were programs we had to design in a particular local language to suit the people who were operating in that area. So when you go to the grassroots and you're listening to the people, then you have the results that you want, because then it works perfectly. You are not imposing, but you are working as a team. And with teamwork, you have success. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, I think Okay, we'll change, certainly. As a donor, we have the same exactly of being a quite formal institution and engaging, but also seeking exactly how to draw on and be inspired by the informal sectors, by this civil society. And we have various instruments, exactly what I mentioned, but we are trying to very much support the local authorities. A core element of that will be strengthened, that is how they will reach out to their stakeholders and to get an engagement. Secondly, we are also working what we call a participatory slum upgrading program with UN Habitat, which very much built on, what can we call it, indigenously developed or slum developed programs to deal with waste, to deal with housing, and try to scale that up and then engage the authorities or local authorities to get them also to contribute and take over. And there we can very much see that this, what should we say, self-developed programs are slowly being, it takes time, but also being taken in by the local authorities, and they are contributing funds to actually scale up and contribute to this. So, yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned it takes time. I'm going to come back to Nigel in a second, but just a question that I want to throw in the mix. We know that often project cycles are quite short. They're like 2 to 3 years. Are we giving ourselves enough time to actually be able to do what we need to do and to build the relationships and to help the capacity building and then move forward?
Well, I mean, we're I would say partly struggling with the idea of scope and outreach, which means normally scales. So we always in a certain project setting, and even if you look at urban LEDs, I mean there's quite a number of cities involved, and we tried, for example, to develop a system of these kind of satellite cities, so that we work in the core with only a small number of cities, but we build in each country a group of cities around that there are sort of co-learning with it in order to reach a certain scale. But nevertheless, of course, to solidly, I mean, if depending on what kind of system you're meeting, and to set up a project in a 3-year scale, and to sort of what kind of results that you can reach. And often, I mean, if you're good, I mean, you manage to develop the strategy, but to come then to something bankable, I mean, and we don't have always the bank with us immediately. I mean, this is sort of what Nigel said. I mean, you go pragmatic, and you start basically also, you have already your kind of first investment done, and then you have the relationship develop and everything. That's mostly what we don't find. And if we realistically look how long it takes a European city to do a land use plan, you can already see what the kind of scale it is if you work in a 3-year project cycle. So what we're looking for is to potentially, at least find some projects that go on a longer cycle. I mean, I have absolutely all understanding that of course we talk about often taxpayers' money, and we need diligence, and we need monitoring, and I also do not see any problem in going like in phases, where you have to potentially have an intermediate result and kind of reapply to get the second tranche or something. But I think overall, it would help if we would have slightly longer project cycles, like up to whatever 5-6 years, and I mean this even sometimes applies within Europe, but definitely in a development cooperation context, I would certainly say we would profit from that.
Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about 2 things. The first one is the time, and then I want to respond to something that Vivian said, because I think it was really important in the context of what we're discussing. So first of all, time. So last night, the Rolling Stones played in the O2 in London. I don't know if you knew that, but some of you may have heard of the Rolling Stones, right? In 1964, they did a song called "Time Is on My Side," and I have to disagree with them. It's not. Right? If we are going to peak emissions by 2030 globally, there's no way we have time to do long project cycles. We must be pragmatic and deal with the finance from my perspective, but also the behavioral changes that are needed, the institutional changes, the technology changes. There is no time. So The luxury of that has long gone. When I started working in this in the early 1990s, when we were talking about climate change, maybe we could have done that, but we've blown it as far as I'm concerned. We've got 2-3 year project cycles and we've got to deliver. Okay, that's the first point. I disagree with the Rolling Stones. Second one, so Vivian made the comment about we can't copy, we have to adapt. And I wanted to talk to that question that Mindy raised, which was, if cities are all so different, how can we share lessons? And this is something that we're doing within the EBRD program. All of our client cities are invited this year to Stockholm. We gather them in one city, but we shifted the last time we did it was in Tirana. And the idea is we share experiences, and okay, we understand that the contexts are very different, but the challenges are the same. All the cities need finance, all the cities need to improve their governance, all the cities are facing terrible, huge environmental challenges. One of the cities that we work in Skopje, has the worst air quality in the whole of Europe. It's in a bowl, it's a health hazard. So they're all facing common challenges. The sharing of experiences maybe means that a city in Ghana can't take exactly how that was addressed in Skopje or somewhere else, but at least it starts to prompt the creative process of them thinking, they did that. Maybe we could change it to the local context in terms of waste. There you go. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Vivian?
I must say that in addressing the climate change issue, there should be a collaborative effort. We have no time, like he said, because the environment has no boundary. And so there should be more stronger synergies within partners who are working towards achieving our development goals. And then there should also be strong legislations for most of these countries, because without legislations, you don't get results. So I think developing partners should help countries that lack legislations to develop their legislations in order to tackle this climate change challenge that we have. Thank you.
You also comment on time. I think obviously we are often behind some of these cycles in how we are providing our funding. I think that it's always a challenge, and one can say it takes very long time to change both legislation, to change how we do things, to change capacity of actors. On the other hand, I also think we see that as very essential that we get this feedback mechanism, that we can assess what is it we have learned from these interventions and then take forward what actually really works and exactly share. So I think this 3 to 5 years is normally what we see, and see very important the evaluation of the lessons and how to actually then adapt what we are doing. So this goes a little bit, let's phase 2. I think we certainly try to, what are successes and move forward with these. On the sharing, I also think I would like to, because one thing is sharing among partners that are sitting facing the same thing. We're also very keen on trying to see how we can take the European experiences, which obviously is at a higher level or a more advanced level. They have more access to finance. They have a more, particular problems. But on the other hand, such elements as the circular economy, the resource efficiency, the scope for leapfrogging in some of our cities, I think something we would really see as a strategic challenge for all of us to see how we can take forward, and are very much keen to see how do we make this a reality. And I think the potential of finding, smarter solution and move to them directly based on our knowledge in Europe, I think is a central element for our strategy.
With the time issue, whether the duration is longer or not, I think it depends on the concept and the model, because if there's enough local content, you train enough on the ground, so you have a backup, so they can continue with the process. So then time does not really become the issue, because you have done so much on the ground that there will be just follow-ups coming from the experts, so the local team will be able to continue with the work that you. So local involvement, that percentage should be looked at. And
Well, I think one issue again about the timing. I think what Lars said already indicates. When you work with public authorities, I would say sometimes the timelines that we are used to is a bit different from potentially a private sector or financial sector. So to change things there is definitely a bit more time consuming. And secondly, I just sort of from the transferability point of view, I think at a certain moment in time, it's important that you sort of also reflect a bit the wider context, in terms of which regulatory frameworks or whichever have been supportive to make these things happen. Because as I said, I think even in other countries, when we start to transfer, we have to really look what the setting is. I mean, on the one hand side, we need to transfer more authority, capacity and knowledge down to the local level, but we also need to make sure that the frameworks are right, and I think that needs to being communicated as well. If we only look always on the local level and we forget that there is a governance on other levels that impacts a lot what's going to happen on local level, I think we would look to be too short-sighted in that sense.
Okay, I'm going to open up the floor for your questions in a moment, so get them ready. We do have microphones going around. No, we don't have microphones to go around. Okay, we'll take. We'll do a thank you, and we'll have someone to take them round. Don't worry, you don't have to go and take the microphones to people. Okay. Just to let you know that obviously we are being web streamed, so if you put your hand up, it's assumed that you're okay to be on air around the world. Give them a big smile, please. Tell us your name and position, and also tell us who your question's for. And if we've got quite a few, I'll take them in groups. So the lady in white.
Hello, my name is Claire Mandouze. I'm special advisor to the Pan-African Organization of Local Government and Cities. So I was very interested in listening to our Ghanaian friend and managing director. I just wanted to know in her project how far she's working with local authorities in the development of a project. Have they been involved since the beginning or whatever? I would be very interested to see the link with the local authorities.
Okay, before you answer, there's another lady here in red over on this corner. It's coming to you. It's got to go the long way round. A little bit of patience. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Florence Egal. I'm working presently with the technical assistance team with UN Habitat in the follow-up of the new urban agenda. They have decided to develop guiding principles for urban-rural linkages to advance integrated territorial development. They started working, one of the first meetings was at the World Urban Forum in February. In Kuala Lumpur, there's going to be an expert group meeting in June in Bolivia, then meetings in July. For the moment, we don't have, as far as I know, anybody from the EU or Eclair, and the reason I'm here is that it's really important we get the environment dimension right in these guiding principles. We think it could be a tool that will help all of us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a gentleman here, and then we'll get the answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Reza Zain Jofrali. I used to be a lawyer. I used to be an economist, and now I'm involved with alternative finance. My question is mostly for Mr. Nigel Jolens and can be open to anyone at the panel. What do you think about the use of sukuk to fund essentially green infrastructure? Thank you.
Can you just, I'm sorry, I don't know what
sukuk is. An asset-backed or asset-based profit and loss sharing bond. There's been 2 sukuk issuances in Europe, one by the UK and one by Luxembourg. These were sovereign sukuks, that is issued by the state. There's an ultra liquidity on the Islamic capital markets. It's considered that by 2020 there'll be a shortfall of about 220 billion USD of sukuks on the market. So why don't we simply connect that shortfall of investable capital instruments to your problematic of funding green infrastructure? Thank you.
Gosh, thank you. I hope you understood that, Nigel. It was a little bit beyond me with that. But anyway, but let's go back to the first question, which was for you, Vivian, about how much you work with local authorities.
Yes, I am actually greatly involved with the local authorities because I work closely with the EPA and the Energy Commission of Ghana. So in the year 2017, our E-Waste Act and the bill came out. And then with the legislation 1932, we banned the importation of used refrigerators from abroad. And my company was to take back the scrap from the system. And so that's why we are able to degas the fridges. The FE we feed back to local industry because by law we are not supposed to export the FE. And with the local authorities, with the informal sector we work with, we register them. We've tried to formalize them, so they are supposed to register with the local authorities to get their permitting. Then we are able to tell who is actually doing what at what time. In the past, it wasn't so. So we are really working with the local authorities and we are getting results. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question about from UN Habitat and why we're not seeing the EU and Eclair involved. Lars.
Yes. I think we have been, from the EU side, very involved in the new urban agenda and was strongly supporting the adoption and contributing to it. Similar how we are working on how to follow up in it and setting indicators. I'm not particularly aware of these specific guidelines. We are very often engaging with UN Habitat. I think you also know the new executive director will come here in June and participate at European Development Days. So we are very happy to continue discussing on this. But I'm not aware of the particular guidelines. But I think the effort to how to take the new urban agenda forward is something that involves all us as stakeholders, the cities, the various institutions that have the territorial development, and of course donors and others that can assist with this here. But the main impetus lies on the cities and the countries to actually develop adequate plans for this year, and we are very happy to engage with that and see where we can contribute to it.
As also, you know, I mean, we are also, of course also engaged with the new urban agenda. The question is, honestly, as the European director, I might not be the first person that has been addressed if we have been invited. I'm even not sure because I mean definitely I didn't receive an invitation, and of course the other issue that we quite honestly have to say. I mean, you know, well, also our capacities are limited, and you know that there are so many processes that we follow from you know CBD to climate to this, so that of course it's very difficult to you know from staff side to cover all these processes. But I don't know. Have we been invited to participate in your process? Yeah.
I'm part of the team that's helping them, and I'm completely aware of the weakness of the process,
yeah.
but of the need to link further.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason I brought this issue up,
Okay.
because it does seem something of common interest.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's great that you've raised it, and I think now is the first moment of creating that link, and I really hope that you will have more discussions after this session over lunch to create that. That's the wonderful thing about Green Week, is people meeting together and making things happen. And Nigel.
The Sukooks. Okay. So before I go on to detailed financial discussion, I wanted to come back to the last question, because I think what was raised there was a really important insight about our boundary setting. If I'm not mistaken, you're talking about urban-rural linkages, right? And I think it's easy for us to think of our cities as being the urban part and what happens inside the dense urban area. But of course, most of what happens inside there only is able to happen because of the resources that are coming outside of that boundary. And now we find it difficult, I have to say, within a financial institution to think about those more systematic and broader boundary discussions when we're considering the impact of our project, but I think it's critical. Okay, let's come to the finance. And rather than have everybody in the audience's eyes glaze over by talking about a detailed financial instrument, what I'd like to do is take the general point that you've made and the specific point you've made and make it more general, because you've raised one issue, and that is the challenge we have with the limited public resources. That is, trillions and trillions of euros are needed to address the climate and environmental challenges in our cities. And the public finances are just not sufficient enough to be able to deliver that. We need to draw on private capital, whether that's equity or debt. And at the moment, private capital is completely underutilized, right? Would you agree? Completely. There's huge potential out there in the fixed income equity space with institutional investors dying, I think, for projects or portfolios like what we're able to deliver through these infrastructure investments, because these infrastructure investments are sound. We've done all the due diligence, packaging them into some kind of financial product that we can sell. Now, that's the nirvana. We work in countries that don't even, in cities that don't even have credit ratings. Okay, so there's no way that they can access private capital, issue green bonds or whatever. Part of our green cities framework includes capacity building for the development of access to the private sector capital. We can talk more detail about Sukuks later.
Okay, thank you. Did you still want to ask your question? Vivian, you said you wanted to ask a question before.
My question goes to the lady working on the guidelines principle. I would like to know whether the principle is meant for the whole continent or for just Europe, and if there's been African involvement in the, and so the African part or the developed world is covered. Our representation is there.
It is global. I think it was mentioned at a UNECA meeting recently in Dakar, and we can talk about that over lunch, as the lady was saying. Okay. But definitely global.
Okay. Thank you. And about the financing, just a quick one. Mostly when the green finance banks come to you, or the financial institutions come, and you agree with them for green finance, when they come back to the field, they change the processes. So I think going forward, they should stick to the agreements they make with you, like percentage-wise for green businesses, because for most green businesses, the margins are small. And so when you go and agree that, for example, you charge the private sector maybe 5%, and you come and you are demanding, like back home, you are demanding 20 or 30%, then the fund will be sitting there and will not be accessible for the process for which it was given for green business. So I think we should have a look at that.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add one issue on the finance. I think, as Nigel says, the tremendous gap there is in finance and the necessity for mobilizing private capital, but also for strengthening the capacity of cities and actors to create local revenues that can underpin such investments. And I think this is partly what is made reference to. I made brief reference to what we call the European External Investment Plan, and this is exactly to help actors, and certainly the banks, to think of new ways, innovative ways, and our actors in the cities to how can we actually experiment with land capture values, etc., a new system, how to strengthen local revenue generation, and where Europe would provide a guarantee and also technical assistance, etc., to try to, reduce the risk for getting the private sector in. And I think this is an area where we're looking very much forward to the banks' work with the cities in this.
In finance parlance, it's about reducing the cost of capital. That's what these guarantees are doing. What does it cost for them to borrow or to get access to that capital?
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? While you're thinking, I've got a question for everybody. I'll be coming back to you. I'm going to keep an eye, and if anybody has something that comes to mind, put your hand up and I'll come to you. The question I have is, we're starting to see in the world that we're now living in, we're starting to see some cities whose maybe national governments are not doing very much about greening and climate change, etc. And cities are taking on the mantle themselves and starting to become spearheading initiatives in let's say, climate change, mitigation, adaptation, but also greening. This is perhaps a good thing, but are there also risks with this? Because if every city champions its own cause, then we're going to have a very fragmented approach. I mean, I don't know, or is it better than doing nothing? Wolfgang.
Well, I mean, as Nigel put it, time is not on our side. So I think,
Rolling Stones, not me.
yeah. No, but you said not. You said you were contradicting them, so I had to quote you. No, but the point is that that certainly, well, and in that sense, in principle, any action is welcome. But I think it's not as spread or individual as we might tend to think. I mean, we just I think 2 years ago now almost, we saw the emergence of the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is based on two initiatives, one more global and based on, let's say, a different structure, and the one more European. But I think this is trying to find common ground, knowledge sharing, capacity building, but also in terms of which is a quite difficult discussion to say, to go to certain standards in terms of monitoring, reporting, also to create the credibility. On the other hand, of course, I think it's, and that's why I'm trying to move carefully. If you flag, I would say the city or the local government issue too strongly. I mean, you still see that of course that there are issues about governance and support, and you should not try to develop a front line, between local governments and whatever regional and national governments, in that sense that we say, oh yeah, well we go strongly, we do it on our own. I mean, we need multi-level governance support, and as also what just came out, of the financing. I mean, if you would like to draw the being attractive or being able to attract the finance that is needed, I mean, you need the support from other levels, other institutions, private sector, guarantees whatsoever. And I think that's why I think, of course, we should encourage spearheading action, but we should not claim we do it on our own. We definitely need the supportive system around cities, and we can only try to demonstrate the ambition, and then by that, of course, trigger the support and also potentially create some pressure on national governments and other institutions to basically follow and support.
Okay, anyone have anything else to add about cities?
I think it should be a collaborative effort, a shared responsibility. Why am I saying this? For example, for the e-waste sector, extended producer responsibility, some countries is being taken care of, and then most other countries, the person will be doing the right thing here, but when it comes to, let's say, Africa, he's dumping all his stuff there and he doesn't care what is happening. So I think there should be an even playing field. And in Europe, I don't know so much about how the EU is doing, but cities that are really doing well with greening their cities should be encouraged. Let's say if every year they contribute a percentage to the development of the European Union, maybe there should be some reduction in their contribution, or they should be encouraged in a way by supporting most of their projects. I don't think it should be an isolated situation whereby people are doing cherry picking. You are not doing anything with your city. Meanwhile, the environment has no boundary. Why should somebody be doing it? I think it should be a collaborative effort, because the climate is not waiting for anybody. Our climate is being destroyed. We are all being destroyed because the environment says it's time for you to take care of me because I've taken care of you for years. So let's ask now. Let's all be ambassadors when we live here today. Let's go preach the news, and the world become a better place for all of us living. Thank you.
Thank you. We should almost end the session on that. It was such a rousing thing. But I do have another question from the audience, and we have a little bit more time. Please tell us who you are and who your question's for.
Yes, thank you. My name is Philip Näslund from the city of Umeå, Sweden. I have a question about urban planning. And we are a lot of cities trying to change our infrastructure on mobility. For example, we have built ourselves in a society with car use in cities. And now many cities are trying to ban cars, to better infrastructure for cycle, buses, etc. Are you looking into that we don't have all the solution, we have made some mistakes, you might say, and now trying to change our infrastructure for more sustainable cities? Are you looking into that when you're doing your investments plan, that there has to be more urban planning, maybe clustering companies for circular economy? That's kind of new way of thinking of urban planning.
Thank you. Last chance. Any other questions in the room? Oh, there's someone at the back. Thank you. We're getting a microphone to you.
Thank you. My name is Ina Koșeru. I am representing the Republic of Moldova. And my question is to Nigel.
Speak into the microphone a bit more.
Yeah, and my question is to Nigel. Dniester River is a transboundary river between Ukraine and Moldova, and there is now a big issue about efficient use of this river. Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, is supplied by water from Dniester River, but there is less and less water in it because of the hydropower plants built in Ukraine, and the intention is to build more. It's a very big dispute. The situation goes very slow. And here I would like to ask how EBRD is reacting on the plans of Ukraine, and if there would be some investment ideas to build these hydropower plants, how would you intervene in this whole picture of stopping this disaster? Because we really need to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And yes, environmental problems don't just stop at the border either. Okay, well, can I have very, very concise answers on these? The urban planning and the mobility and how we've got to be better at our urban planning. Wolfgang?
Well, I mean, I think this is part of what we say. I mean, the planning strategy and management skills that we have to to basically develop, and of course we try to what nice. I mean, in principle we try to leapfrog and try to sort of avoid mistakes. I mean, the question is, and that's also in an organization like ours. I mean, as long as we live in the societies that we live in and we promote the lifestyles that we live, it's very hard to tell other people, to not do things, because if you look at our advertisement industry, and I'm coming from a country, that is still heavily depending on the car industry, where and that we have quite an impact and an issue in Europe. I mean, how can you, I mean, this is very. It's a very sensitive issue, I would say. But on the other hand, I mean, we clearly, and this is what we see from the example from Ghana. You see that on the other hand side, all these informal developments, and you can really work with and develop a new model that is even culturally grounded. And I think this is the challenge that we have to manage when we work. That's in the transfer of knowledge and capacity. To not impose things, but bring the knowledge, but also work on in a dialogue way, and also see what is coming from the ground. We don't know everything, and we don't know best everything, but we have to facilitate this process in a very careful manner to order to achieve the goals that we obviously all share.
Thank you. Nigel, can you keep your answer brief, because I really want to start wrapping up now. We're coming almost to lunchtime.
You mean you want me to discuss the diplomatic relationship between Ukraine and Moldova
in 2
briefly?
seconds, please?
Oh, okay, that's easy. So I'm not going to comment on the diplomatic relationship between Ukraine and Moldova, but thank you for the question. What I will talk about is that the pressing issue now is for Chisinau to deal with water challenges, okay? And we have an agreement well, we had an agreement. I just received a message this morning as I was coming to Brussels that the mayor of Chisinau did not win the election, so there's a new mayor, so we'll have to go back and discuss with the local government. Am I right? Yes, correct. So we had an agreement with the acting mayor previously that we would be doing a Green City Action Plan in the city of Chisinau that would be addressing a range of environmental issues, including water efficiency issues. And I am absolutely sure that there is plenty of scope to improve the efficiency of which water is used in Chisinau, in part to address this challenge that that Chisinau is facing.
Okay, thank you. Lars, and can you give me, when you've finished making the point you want to say, I'm going to ask everybody to give me literally one sentence, not any more, of what you're going to take out of this session and what people can be taking away, okay? Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on the issue of urban planning and the idea of finding, solutions that we think is right. I think it's very important, obviously, we bring these things and share what we are doing. We are doing sustainable urban mobility plan and try to share that. But I think we have to be very clear that the ownership is key in this here. That means we can support what the cities want to take forward. And I think it will not work unless this is the basis of our cooperation. What can we take on out of this here? I think from our take, the urban agenda cut across a range of areas. And I think it's phenomenally complex. It's very important. And I think what we really want to see and promote is that we get mobilized all stakeholders and really jointly try to see how can we find, solutions on this common challenge. So for us, it's how can we facilitate that all stakeholders come forward. There's a voice for everybody.
Okay, Nigel, what are you going to take away?
So I love that comment that Vivian made. Maybe we could ask her to repeat it again. I would love that's what I'm going to take away is Vivian's comment. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, beyond Vivian's comment, I would just like to take away that I think we have a bit room to move to align the strategy and governance development with the finance sector. And I think what the EBRD started is, I think, positive approach way forward to really bring that into the banking sector rather than collaborate and just sort of keep these areas always separate.
Our climate action now, there should be shared responsibility, there should be synergies, stronger synergies, and we should try to replicate positive actions taking place in other cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, on that positive note, actually, we are now coming to the end of the session. Thank you to all our panelists for the very stimulating discussions, and thank you for your questions as well. Lunch is going to be held, I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure you'll find it. Follow your nose. It's probably some of it in the tent and some of it downstairs. Don't forget, if you've taken headsets, don't forget to return them to the place where you got them from. And there are also surveys asking your thoughts and feelings on what you've heard so far and how Green Week is. The organisers are very interested to hear your responses, so either over lunchtime you can fill in a survey and take it to the survey desk, and there is also an online option as well if you want to do it afterwards. They've also asked me to mention there's a fantastic place called the Tools Room, which is actually near this room. It's a special area where there are demonstrations of all the various tools and platforms that exist to help cities develop in a sustainable way. And I certainly know that there's always, whenever I go to moderate anything, I always hear about these incredible platform this and toolkit there, and nobody knows about them. So really, I would suggest you do go and make some time to go to the tool room and see what's around, because there are maybe things that you can learn there. Thank you to all our panelists for sharing their expert knowledge on behalf of DG Environment, but also from the organisers, co-organisers of this session. Thank you to our technicians for operating our microphones and making sure everything worked. Thank you to our interpreters. I'm sorry we didn't necessarily use your services that much, but thank you, they were appreciated. And of course, thank you. I would like you all to give yourselves a big round of applause.